Hi, I'm Susan Biggs. I'm the director of the Sydney Peace Foundation. At the Sydney Peace Foundation, we're worried about the impact that a warming climate will have on access to justice and global peace. We believe lasting peace means a just and fair transition to a safe climate for everyone. We're interviewing leading thinkers and change makers about the link between climate action, peace, and justice in this new series, A Climate of Peace. I'm joined today by David Laser, author and journalist, who wrote the cover story for The Good Weekend on May the 3rd, and it was called Call of the Wild. So welcome to A Climate of Peace, and welcome to David Laser.
Hi, Susan.
Full disclosure, David's also a very dear friend of mine. So, Dave, you wrote the article, a very long, very good article in the Good Weekend 3 weeks ago. Can you tell us how that was for you and what did you learn?
Well, I started researching the story in December in drought, and then the drought turned to fire, the worst fires in Australian history, and then the fires turned to dust storms and hailstorms, and then the storms became the floods, and then the floods eventually turned into the pandemic. So it was Mother Nature in all its fury during those 5 months. And how was it for me? It was traumatic to be in it, like it was for most Australians. And it was traumatic to write about it because I think what the last summer showed that in Australia was that we were ground zero for climate change, and that what we saw unleashing itself upon this country over the summer was the beginning of what was to come. And that is the result of many factors, but in some, it was a sort of a galvanizing moment for me. I mean, there's many things I learnt about climate change and about the way in which nature speaks, the way in which Mother Nature, the way she speaks, and the way in which the earth is hurting. And so I chose trees and birds as my point of entry into the story, standing in a forest in Victoria while great swathes of the country were burning, and this forest was still intact, and learning more about trees and forests and birds than I ever had. But I mean, I could have chosen any number of points of entry into the story, melting glaciers and desertification and putrefying air and choking oceans and rising waters and the unraveling of ecosystems and disappearing species. I mean, there's just so much that is going on, and you can't kind of, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an ecologist, but those who know about this have been telling us for 60 years. We've been getting the warnings, and now the warnings are beyond just speculation. It's scientific consensus about what is happening, and so we are in a very, very serious moment in human history.
So, given all of the situation that you've outlined, why do you think this is such a contentious issue in Australia?
Well, Australia has had a very kind of special relationship to the fossil fuel industry, and particularly to coal, since the oil shocks of the 1970s. And if you were to read David Ritter from Greenpeace and his book on the coal industry and the way in which it has subverted democratic institutions, and both political parties are in some ways they have been hijacked by the fossil fuel industry and by the coal lobbyists, and they spend a lot of money making sure that their interests are preserved. And neither major political party in Australia has any plan really to exit coal. And for us, and coal is the greatest cause of global warming. Burning of coal, extracting coal, shipment of coal is the major cause of CO2 emissions around the world. And neither political party has a plan for really exiting coal and leaving probably 90 to 95% of it in the ground. And, you know, I think that's kind of part of the Australian story. It's the story of extraction. That what lies under the ground is ours. And we can just dig it, mine it, frack it, do whatever we want, export it, and in so doing, we are playing havoc with the interdependence of living systems. And there is this complete blindness, or either willful or unconscious, to our kinship with nature. And it's all about prosperity, economic prosperity. That's the mantra that we're fed all the time. And I think that First Nations people have a lot to teach us about this mysterious kind of relationship that we have, and this information flow between nature and humans. And they've had a dialogue with nature for tens of thousands of years, and nature is a sentient thing. I mean, trees speak to each other, they communicate with each other, and under the soil and through the air, and the science has shown that. We have a kind of almost like a 19th century worldview about this. In the same way we used to think that animals don't have emotions and we can just butcher and slaughter them. I mean, we still butcher and slaughter them. But, you know, butchers never understood, and many probably still don't, the emotional life of animals. But we know now that animals, of course, are sentient creatures. They feel pain. Well, so does nature. And the earth is hurting, but I think that there is this old, dare I say it, often white male patriarchal view about nature, and it comes from the book of Genesis. It comes from this, that we can bring nature to heal. We can lord over nature. We can do what we want to it without any consequences. And now we're seeing the consequences.
Mm. And I know when you wrote this story for The Good Weekend, it was quite traumatic in many ways. And I wonder, how are you feeling now? Do you feel optimistic or pessimistic for our future?
Well, it depends who I'm speaking to. You know, if I want to speak to young people, I will try and extract, there's that word again, every drop of optimism I can find, because everyone needs hope. Everyone needs to have a future that they can look forward to. But at the same time, we are in serious trouble. And so I like Christiana Figueres, you know, the United Nations Executive Secretary for Climate Change, who led the climate agreement in Paris. I like her term stubborn optimism. So it's not optimism in this kind of naive way. And it's not despair, because despair is futile. So at some point that there's a midpoint between those two, where this is the time to act. We have 10 years now to act, to bring emissions down. If we want to create a net zero emissions world by 2050, we have to reduce emissions by half by 2030. So there's many, many things we can do. And in that sense, I think you can gain a sense of hope, at least, from taking the smallest action.
Mm. So what do you think are the consequences for a peaceful and just society of a continued failure to address climate change?
Well, you think about what's going to happen if the seas rise and the ice caps melt and the deserts keep growing, expanding, and people are pushed out of their homes into already crowded cities. And hundreds of millions of people are going to be scrabbling for higher ground. And I mean, the consequences of the Arctic or the Antarctic ice sheets melting sooner than we thought, and that's possibly happening, the consequences are unfathomable. And there will be food riots all over the world. There will be water shortages all over the world. This is Cormac McCarthy's The Road stuff. This is kind of dystopian. This is a dystopian world. And so I think the consequences are beyond imagination, except that they are within our grasp of imagination. The Great Barrier Reef will be dead. Cities, low-lying cities, will be flooded. The Gulf Coast will be overwhelmed with rising waters. The insurance industry will go bust because the reinsurance industry won't be able to. You've got to have a reinsurance market to have an insurance market. Who's going to be able to get insurance if you're building or rebuilding in those danger zones? The consequences are just infinite.
Mm. So in your view, this is the last question, in your view, if you could take one action to move towards a safe climate for everyone, what would that be?
I'm reluctant to kind of go for single cause or single bullet kind of solutions to anything because the world's much too complex for that. But I would remove Donald Trump from office. America is the most powerful still economy in the world, even though we're witnessing the unraveling of the American empire. I think America still has a massive role to play in global action on climate change. And Donald Trump has led a science-denying, climate change-denying administration, and they have done more to dismantle a global accord and regulations within America in 3.5 years than we ever thought possible. So, and I wouldn't remove Trump and replace him with Pence. I would remove Trump and bring in a Biden administration, and America would then rejoin the Paris Accords and reinstate many of the environmental regulations that have been dismantled, and we would have global leadership. That's where I'd start.
Mm. Well, I guess we'll see in November whether that happens. David Laser, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And everybody, if you haven't read it already, get a copy of the Good Weekend article. So thank you all, and goodbye.